here's the penalties. Civil penalties are up to $500 a day. Criminal penalties are 2 years of imprisonment and $10,000. But if it's knowing, then civil penalties are $500 a day, and criminal penalties are 5 years in prison and a $250,000 fine.
Oh
and
my
then
gosh.
unauthorized use or disclosure under federal law, it's 10 years of imprisonment and a $500,000 fine.
Welcome to the Answers for Elders radio show.
And welcome everyone to Answers for Elders Radio Network, heard across the USA on your favorite podcast channel and also on YouTube. As we are navigating later life, whatever that is, we realize that later life is interconnected, but one of the foundational principles always is the financial and estate planning piece, because it honors your future, it honors the law of which you can most proceed forward, and also just in actuality, it makes it easier on the people that you love that are going to be taking care of you at the end of your life as well as after you pass away. And so we are so honored again to have Stephen Waltar back with us, estate planning attorney from Legacy Estate Planning in Bellevue, Washington. Steve, welcome back to the show.
Back in the saddle.
Back in the saddle. We've missed you, my friend. I know you've been out traveling,
And our first topic today, it affects the entire nation. So it's not just Washington law. This is federal law I'm going to talk about first.
You know, you just made me aware of a new law that we're going to talk about, and that is called the Corporate Transparency Act. Would you define that for our listeners?
Yeah, so the Corporate Transparency Act is basically a way to make sure that when businesses are created, you can't launder money, you can't hide who the beneficial owners are. And it's really trying to avoid crime or cut down on people from doing that. And so it has a good purpose, but it's really overreaching. And I want to explain who it affects and how big and bad the penalties are if you don't comply, and kind of get into that.
You know, when we started Answers for Elders 16 years ago, I had a lot of people tell me to incorporate my company offshore to avoid a lot of the things. And obviously that isn't going to happen anymore with this new law. Isn't that correct?
So this law is for anyone that created a business this year. So in 2024.
Right.
And there are some exclusions. Nonprofits, the really large corporations are out of it, but it's LLCs, it's corporations, it's things like that. And basically you have to report the entity, and then you have to report. So if you're the agent, like that's, as a law firm, we help people incorporate. We help do LLCs. People want to have their rental in an LLC for asset protection. But you have to report within the first 90 days. And you have to report lots of things. And even to be a reporting agent, the IRS and Treasury has your social security number. I guess they have that, but they have your driver's license. They have a bunch of stuff. And then for everyone in the business, you have to say who owns more than 25%. So it's really hard now for anyone that is creating an entity to hide behind their lawyer. That's the basic idea. So it affects most businesses, right? Most small businesses. And when you report, you got to report the full legal name, the trade names, the addresses, state and tribal stuff, the taxpayer identification number, length of or full legal names, right? People don't, I don't even like to call my clients and say, can I have your social security number? Because I have to report that sort of thing.
Yeah. And
you got to get certified with a special spot to get your reporting ID. A lot of information. So kind of cumbersome to do all this.
Yeah. Yeah. Our entity, Answers for Elders, is a C corporation in Delaware, but we have to domicile in Washington State, which basically says, this is where we are, this is what we do. And all of our licensing, it costs more than our corporation to do that. I think it was like, if I seem to remember, it was like $350 to do Delaware. And of course you have a franchise tax that you pay there, but it cost me like $900 for Washington State for all the stuff that we had to do.
Let me tell people who's exempt. There's like 23 entities, banks, holding companies, basically things registered with the SEC, insurance companies, the big, the Microsofts of the world, they're exempt.
Multinational organizations that do business globally, correct?
And even
Okay.
though trusts are exempt, the challenge is if a trust owns an LLC or more than a 25% interest in an
Ah,
LLC, then the trustees certainly have to report. And even
yeah,
though the company is to report, what if they don't report? It's the registered agent, the trustee, and even my firm is sometimes the trust protector, a way to kind of go in and
yeah.
fix a trust or be the hired
Mhm.
gun to make sure that people don't fight in court.
Right.
So that's it's kind of worrisome.
So what is the difference between a registered agent and what they're talking about?
The requirement is that the entity reports, but usually, like if you're the person that formed it, you're sometimes
Mhm.
they call it a governor or executor, but like if I
Mhm.
go online for my client and I form an LLC, I'm the one that created it.
Right.
And so I have a responsibility to do that. If someone is the registered agent of the corporation, they also have a duty. And then
Right.
the beneficial owners have a duty also. But the question is who's actually doing the reporting? Here's the fun stuff though. Let me tell you, here's the penalties. Civil penalties are up to 500 a day. Criminal penalties are 2 years of imprisonment and $10,000. But if it's knowing, then civil penalties are 500 a day and criminal penalties are 5 years in prison and a $250,000 fine.
Oh
And
my
then
gosh.
unauthorized use or disclosure under federal law, it's 10 years of imprisonment and a $500,000 fine. So that just, I wanted to make sure that any entity that we are the registered agent of, I said, I want out. I don't care. It's not worth it because
No.
if you're late in your filing, these things are just going to start to accrue.
I know that you said there's been some challenges to this law. It went into effect in 2024. Is that correct?
It did.
This year.
December 4th,
Mm-hmm.
it was actually the 3rd. A federal judge, so the many states had some challenges, but a federal judge in Texas, he got a preliminary injunction. So all of the reporting requirements are halted.
Wow.
Now, that isn't the end of the story. So my
No.
practice point is obviously if you formed an entity, talk with the attorney or the accountant that did that, talk with your registered agent. But for the short term, we're off the hook. There's no reporting required right now.
There are times when companies are acquired or, like you said, passed down in lineage in estates, things like
Yep.
that.
Yep.
How does the Corporate Transparency Act work into these situations?
Yeah, so anytime there's a transfer of beneficial ownership or even an address change, then there's a duty to report. And
Mhm.
so if the reporting agency doesn't do it, then these fines can mount up.
Wow. So obviously, Big Brother is spending much more time watching what we're doing in the business world. So,
I think
and
it's
then,
like a lot of things. The basic idea is to stop all the money laundering. That makes sense.
yeah,
The
yeah,
implementation and making people, how would I know if my clients changed addresses? I wouldn't know that, right?
yeah. You have a business. What are some things that you need to look for?
Well, you should always be in touch with your registered agent, and you
Mhm.
should just probably touch in on things once a year. That's for sure.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
if you've gotten that letter from your law firm or your accountant, don't throw it aside like it's some little class action lawsuit over, $20. This is a big
Mhm.
deal. You ought to check in with your advisors.
Yeah, absolutely. And you have to have full disclosure to your advisors as well.
Correct.
So now if one of the shareholders is a corporation, does that still apply?
Well, everything's on hold right now, but
Okay.
yeah, any entity that owns 25% or more of a qualifying company. So it doesn't matter if Jeff Bezos owns Amazon. That's a big company and he owns that doesn't matter.
Mhm.
But it matters if a trust or a business becomes a new owner of a small entity that was created after
Absolutely.
January 1 of 2020.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So when you're doing an estate plan program, obviously there's a questions that you're asking people when they have a business. I'm sure that's something that you're addressing when you meet with them. Is that correct?
Yeah, we have to know what they own and
Mm-hmm.
do they have entities, and now we have to know when they were created and have you reported.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, what about businesses that were created before 2024?
They're exempt,
Ah.
but they're only exempt on the initial report. They are if there's a
Oh, okay.
change, like the kids inherited or something, then they're absolutely. required to report the change.
How would people been notified of this? Because this is first I've heard of it.
There's things like the Heckerling Institute where, there's national organizations that track things like this, and there's so I got it from some of my attorney groups. And then what they do is most law firms would then tell their clients. Some did it's hard to mail a letter to everyone because the addresses change. So we publish a newsletter, and then there's a download of an article. What sometimes people do is for entities they created, the creator of the entity would write a letter to them. But again, their address may have changed.
Yeah.
So, it tends to be those attorneys and accountants that are involved in either corporate formations or taxations or LLCs. It's probably hard for the average person. It's pretty easy to create an entity in Washington State.
Pretty easy.
I don't know.
Yeah. Well, this is really good information. And for our listeners, Stephen Waltar is an estate planning and elder law attorney in Bellevue, Washington. You handle all of the state of Washington, and you work with families and making sure that their wishes are known. And not only, if they cannot act for themselves while they're still alive, but also after they pass on. And Steve, it's such an honor to have you with us. And guess what? We have more segments coming with you.
Attorneys can't live with them, can't live without them.
We'll be right back right after this. Did you know that you can discover hundreds of podcasts in our library on senior care? So visit our website and discover our decision guides that will help you also navigate decision making. Find us at answersforelders.com.